Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sebastiaan Stiller. I am the moderator of this side event with the title Pathways to Sustainable Building Markets Through Lifecycle-based Information. We have a great panel. Thank you. We have a great panel here with me, and I'm going to introduce them very quickly, the names and affiliations, whereas we'll have an introduction, 3 short introductions to set the stage on the topics, whereas we will go into 5 challenges that will then also be discussed, and there's room for Q&A with the panelists. Better? Oh. Great. So welcome. My first speaker is Jonathan Duwyn. He's from the UNEP GlobalABC and the Lifecycle Initiative. We also have, now I have to check here, Jauad Kharraz from the RCREEE. We have Elin Eriksson from IVL. We have Nasser Ayoub from EPD Egypt. We have Ehab, Shalaby, I hope I announced that correctly, from DCarbon Egypt. We have Noriyuki, Mita, from ICCA and Mitsubishi Chemicals. And last but not least, Ahmed, Himy from the AMEE. I'm gonna start off now, 4 or 5 minutes, where I will hand over then to you to set the stage. So I think I would like to have a couple of assumptions, or I would say setting the stage in that sense that we do understand, and I think also want a recognition that global environmental problems such as the decarbonization of a construction industry can never be solved without an active business sector working together in the value chains. So it's a lot about labor and working together to actually stem the solutions to meet those challenges that we're going to discuss. We also do know that the private sector is increasingly committing to different kinds of targets, objectives, and frameworks. A few of the most prominent ones are the SDGs, a strong driver, science-based targets on carbonization, I would say also the scope. We have the CDP, and I would say more corporate targets like the net zero and carbon neutrality. We also do know that the private sector is acting on climate change as we speak, and that the topic is gaining relevance. And we have seen this now during the COP27, that there's a lot of activity, but not all is yet mainstream. So in that sense, we observe 2 different public sectors. One is, we see level playing fields. We see a public sector that is trying to frame the ecosystem for a green economy, in which they want a certain fair market competition, and very important, avoid greenwashing. We also see another level playing field, a second one that is a bit more prevailing as it is the private sector that wants to develop standards in, is it better? Standards in the field of environmental management and conformity. So how do they report on climate mitigation activities? And that these 2 level playing fields do not always match and bite each other. Is the sounding better or not? Closer. Now. That they don't always match. So sometimes they bite. Of course, there's different interests. What we do also see is actually when we talk about solutions supporting the decarbonization of an industry or a material or a product, we do know that these kind of solutions may be found in new technologies, in new materials, but also in business and service models that are changing the way we operate. But it all starts with that any kind of improvement that we have starts with good measurement, and measurement not only to produce information, but also knowledge, so that we do know what we talk about. And to transfer that kind of knowledge, we need to transparently communicate that. And for that, we need a vehicle in order to understand that the market wants to work with trustful, credible data, So when you do an LCA, you also want to transfer that to multiple users of your information. So think about public procurement, think about BIM models, so building information models that want to make use of that carbon numbers. And therefore it's important that this market can work with third-party verified environmental impact data from manufacturers for different kind of purposes of use, so that they can actually use them for comparability when they also make business decisions based on third-party verified data. And I think that's also the bridge maybe to you, Jonathan, when I talk about climate change impacts that are caused by the building and construction sector. And then your job is today to link this to embodied carbon and LCA and EPD. So the stage is yours.
Thank you. I'll probably sit because it seems that it's easier with the microphone. And so, I mean, everybody knows that the buildings and construction sector is a heavyweight, I would say, in the climate emissions. I mean, today we are at 37% of emissions coming from energy-related emissions coming from buildings and construction, and actually 35% of final energy demand. So it's 1/3, more or less, of the energy and the emissions are coming from the buildings and construction sector. At the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, we have been actually strongly advocating for this agenda over the last 7 years, and to actually get the countries and all the stakeholders working in the built environment to jointly push to get this agenda more strongly here also at the climate change COPs. And I think we are succeeding today with this agenda. Now, when we talk about 37% of emissions, a little bit more than 1/4 of those emissions are actually what we call the embodied carbon and are related to the materials and the construction. Closer still? Okay. And are actually the ones that are coming from the construction process and the materials. So to reach the Paris Agreement goals, we absolutely need also to address this embodied carbon share, and we must totally transform the buildings and construction sector and the way we are constructing today. So in 2019, there was a report that came out from the International Resource Panel, and the International Resource Panel, that report was called Resource Efficiency and Climate Change. And they showed that actually with material efficiency strategies in the G7 countries, we can reduce about 90% of the emissions, they say. Of course, it's about reducing the emissions of all the value chains and the supply chains, so it's reducing the emissions from everyone, more or less. So that's why it's such an important share of emissions that can be reduced by material efficiency strategies. To date, there's been a lot of emphasis on energy efficiency, operational energy. And the whole part on embodied carbon currently is quite new in a sense. I mean, it's not new for a lot of people that have been working on it, but it's new for, I would say, most of the decision makers that have not been really looking at it. And in the climate agenda, if you look at the NDCs today, energy efficiency is in most of the NDCs. So energy building codes, when they mention buildings, it's all about energy efficiency. But no one talks about the embodied carbon. And if we want to achieve it, the Paris Agreement, we certainly need to tackle that issue. And that's where I think that, you know, the life cycle approach comes in, and the life cycle tools become an important element. So I guess most of the people know what the life cycle assessment is, but it's basically the assessment of the potential environmental impacts that are associated with the product, a process, a system, all the way from the extraction of the raw material to the end of life. And what we are trying to push is that actually we take what we call the whole life carbon approach to a building, so that you start from the planning and look all the way to the end of life of the building, and you start thinking at the beginning what emissions actually you're going to have. So Adopting a life cycle thinking approach in the built environment will allow decision makers to better assess the benefits of addressing also the supply chain and the production of the materials. Currently, the manufacturing of building materials is estimated to be responsible for about 10% of the emissions. But when we say 10% of the emissions, this is a global number. And if you go to a number of developing countries, actually that number is much higher because most of those countries are actually not using that much energy in their buildings. So the embodied carbon part is actually much more important and is actually going to increase over time as we make progress with energy efficiency, with renewables, and as there are more and more buildings that still need to be constructed. So if we don't change things now, the trend would really worsen. I mean, it is expected that material use will be more than double by 2060, and 1/3 of those material extraction will be for the building and construction sector. So it's a sizable share of all the materials that are being used in the world. Now, the life cycle assessment approach and tools, I think, is a powerful tool that can be applied at different levels to help with this transition. At the national level, there are tools such as the Sustainable Consumption and Production Hotspot Analysis that can help identifying the hotspot areas of the unsustainable production and consumption along the supply chains. And knowing where those hotspots are, the decision makers can actually set the priorities in the national policies and also in the NDCs, for example. At the organizational level, the LCA is used to map the key drivers of impact of a company's entire product. And this in return directs improvement strategies for the organization. And at the building level, the life cycle assessment is considered to be the best framework to assess the potential environmental impacts of the products currently available. Several tools are being developed to do life cycle assessment of buildings, materials, I would say of buildings and also of the building and construction materials. And one of such tools, of course, is the environmental product declaration, which focuses more specifically on the products. And we'll hear more from the panel about the EPD and how they are used in the construction sector, with some examples from Egypt, but also other examples from around the world. But what is very important if we want to transform the sector is that actually all participants along the life cycle of the building and construction industry need to join forces. We all need to work together to improve the overall carbon performance of buildings and construction. At the government level, at the government level, of course, it's about introducing building energy codes, or I would even say green building codes, because I think that goes beyond looking at the energy-related issues. And then also shifting those codes to be performance-based, rather than looking at some prescriptive type of materials or technologies, but more thinking about performance, so that any material or any equipment that meets the performance can be used in the building. And then the policies also need to be shifted to promote circular economy. That will be very important overall. The finance sector needs to invest in innovation to reduce embodied carbon, and innovation is actually really important here today. And also increase overall financing on energy efficiency. At the manufacturing level, it's important to upgrade existing plants to comply with the best available low carbon technologies and practices. And then architecture, engineering, and design companies have a very important work to do to ensure that what they design will be designed for longer life. They reduce the material use, they promote local materials, and then also look at disassembly and reuse of the materials. All of that is very important to take into account. That's why a life cycle approach is really important to take into account for the building and construction sector to be able to reduce all our emissions. Now, we are working currently to engage countries behind a building breakthrough. You know that in Glasgow, there were the Glasgow breakthroughs put forward. There are a number of sectors that have pushed for actually commitments, let's say, towards a breakthrough in the steel sector, for example. And we are now trying to bring, at the moment, the countries under the leadership of France and Morocco behind a buildings breakthrough. And tomorrow morning, we actually will be having an announcement with a number of countries to make a call for the buildings breakthrough at the Buildings Pavilion. So I hope I will see many of you there. The whole idea is really to push towards taking a whole life carbon or a whole life approach to buildings and construction. And I will stop here.
It's perfect timing. Thank you, Jonathan, for this helicopter flight, bringing us into the topic. And I would say also you touched upon a couple of the challenges that we go into more depth also in a couple of minutes with the speakers. But now I would like to give the stage to Dr. Nasser Ayoub, who will, I would say, have a bit of more of a funneled view on what actually LCA and EPD is. Do you want to speak? Stand here or want to sit? Yeah, okay.
So hello everyone. Thank you, Sebastiaan. Thank you everybody for being here. So I think Jonathan made my life easy by presenting why we are doing LCA, but what is EPD? When somebody wants to make diet, what first thing he looks at? So first he looks at what is the content of the nutrition facts of the food, and then start to pick the food that will meet his requirements for diet. And actually, EPD, which is our topic today, is doing the same. So what we are doing is that we calculating the environmental impact of a product. So it's, a product is the feed of building materials and everything. So we calculate how much energy it takes from cradle to grave, so during its life cycle. How much CO2 emissions and how much water. Actually, in Egypt, we are a water-stressed country, so estimating water in the life cycle of the product is really needed. So this is what we calculate in the EPD. And the EPD the acronym is Environmental Product Declaration. It declares information about the project, as I just explained. It is transparent because it is done according to an ISO methodology, ISO identified methodology, ISO 14040 and 14044. So basically it is transparent because we have to show what exactly materials that came into the product from extraction of materials to until it is used and then reused in its life cycle. So transparent, objective, and comparable materials. So the comparability here is actually a key, because if I would like to do a design, and this is exactly what Jonathan was explaining, so to reduce the CO2 emissions of the life cycle, then we need to measure. So how much CO2 of one product and the other, and then we can select. And this is exactly what is the leadership for energy and environment, environmental design system is doing. So they are taking the emissions, the CO2 emissions from the product, and trying to calculate the life cycle of emissions, of life cycle carbon footprint of the building. So what is the life cycle? As explained here, it is from cradle, extraction of raw materials, and then transportation, manufacturing, use, and recycling or reuse. So according to the standard, we have 4 steps of doing this, of doing life cycle assessment. We do life cycle assessment for different purposes. One of them is doing an EPD. But the main goal of doing an LCA is to reduce emission, is to identify the hotspots in the product life cycle and to tackle these high spots and bringing them down. So basically, if I would like to do life cycle assessment, I should define the goal. Is the goal to do an EPD, or is the goal to compare between 2 different products, or is it to do product design? It's innovation. If I have a product, a new product, then I would like to assess its environmental impact, then I should identify this in the goal, then collecting data. And I think this is one of the issues that our panel today is focusing on, is the challenges that we have to perform life cycle assessment, especially in developing countries like here in MENA region. Actually, still the data issue is even in Europe still there, but it's even much worse in here. So we need to collect data. Once collected data, we identify the environmental impact, as I said, climate change, ozone depletion, water use, and so on. Then we can compare these product. And finally, the interpretation explaining the hotspots and how can we tackle these. So this is life cycle assessment. Taking the data, as I said, life cycle assessment is a confidential one because basically it is done between the consultant and the manufacturer. Then taking the results out and issuing them in an EPD. And actually there are several EPDs published here in Egypt from Saint-Gobain, Heidelberg, TCI, Sanmar, and several others. So this is EPD and life cycle assessment. So why EPD and life cycle assessment is important? As we look here, normally we assess the life cycle of the product. I mean, we assess the use, but identifying the life cycle assessment help us to locate where exactly in the life cycle, as we see here. So we see maintain and reuse, and then we have remanufacturing. Is remanufacturing is good for our product or not? So life cycle assessment help us taking this decision, identify if remanufacturing is better or just doing the business as usual. Is the material is toxic, so we should replace it with untoxic material or not? So this is the type of decisions that LCA is supporting. So why people are doing so far? They should meet corporate sustainability goal. They basically, in our region here, in MENA regions, they are using it for marketing. So people lead or BREEAM and other green rating system, they are asking for EPDs and life cycle assessment. So we do it for marketing. Green product process innovation. So if I would like, as I said, to innovate, then this is the best way to assess. Sustainable supply chain management, because we actually calculate for the transportation and we calculate for the packaging of the product and everything. So the external drivers is basically, the external drivers are doing comparative studies between our product and the other product, and between green building public procurement tenders. So tenders now, many people are asking for a proof of your emissions. So we can use them. We, as I said, compliance with LEED, benchmarking. Actually, most of the people, when we do life cycle assessment, people say, so where we are? So this is the first question. Is it good? Is it bad? So I said there is no good or bad, because there are some products are good for climate, but they are not good for water use. There are, I always give an example or a comparison between the electric car and the hammer. Which one is better? So we cannot judge, actually. We cannot tell. If we are speaking about environment and CO2 emissions, then of course, definitely electric car is better. But if we are talking about ecotoxicity, then yeah, I have some doubts about this, about if electric cars are good. So that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser, for explaining us not only what LCA and EPDs, but also the key drivers, internal and external ones. We're going to hear more about that. And it is always now also the bridge to the actual challenges that are connected to LCA, and I would say also using LCA information for different purposes. When we want talking about the pathways for decarbonizing the construction sector. As that, we are now going to go into the challenges, as I noticed, and the challenges are considered from a MENA perspective, and then we also made an, oh, I'm not sharing, also with some global analogies, because we do recognize that some of the challenges are local, but they definitely, in MENA, you're not on your own, because we know that these challenges are global challenges that we have to tackle. So in that sense, the first topic that I would like to present, also here by Jauad Kharraz, is the topic on data collections, and I would say here the lack of data available. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Jauad Kharraz, Executive Director of RCREEE. So I will not pretend to be an expert in LCA in the building sector, but in RCREEE we support the Arab countries in their energy transition, and one of the, obviously the main mandate is to support policies in the energy efficiency area. In this regard, we are carrying out a European project funded by the European Commission, and we are managing together with MENA, the National Agency of Energy Efficiency in the Mediterranean region. It's about energy efficiency in building and appliances. So in this project, actually, we do a lot of activities. The main activities are dealing with benchmarking of policies at the level of the 8 Arab countries. Also the legislation, so there are national codes. Unfortunately, they are not mandatory. So this is obviously an issue. When it's not mandatory, then it's really really hard to get the data and to get the right information to develop, the performance assessment or the life cycle assessment itself. Also, we do create sort of national and regional, what we call sustainable energy investment forums. So the idea is to gather all the stakeholders around the table, local banks, financial institutions, and energy players to work together to tackle these challenges that we have. So I'm going to focus on data because previously I've been working a lot on similar issues of data information systems. I know it's not easy, and when it comes to data always, there is a need to harmonize data, there is a need to interconnect databases, there is a need to identify who is producing what in data, who is using what, and it's really an exercise that takes time, particularly for the southern Mediterranean countries. In Europe, obviously, there are reporting tools, there are directives, so that facilitate things. So there are probably automatic reporting at the level of European Commission on different kind of issues. So I also prepared the sort of, for myself also, for the audience. Traditionally, as you know, the emissions embodied in the construction materials haven't been considered important in the past. However, they are becoming crucial due to the short time frame in which the emissions should be reduced. Moreover, evaluating the environmental burden of construction materials has proven problematic. and the reliability of the reported impact estimate is questionable. So more reliable information from the construction sector is urgently needed to back and guide decision-making process. Currently, the building sector environmental impact assessment predominantly employ commercial software with environmental impact databases and report results without knowledge about the impact of the software database choice on the result. So LCA, as you know, is one of the best mechanisms for allowing architects and other building professionals to understand the energy use and other environmental impact associated with all the phases of a building life cycle. So procurement, construction, operation, decommissioning, and so on. So definitely it's important to allow us to measure the environmental footprints of a product, but before we can measure, we need information on our products. So we cannot obviously manage something that we cannot measure. Data on the usages, emissions, utilities, transport, materials, and so on. So all these kind of data are needed, but what data do we need from who, as I said? So this is a challenging question actually, in particular as Dr. Nasser said, in our region. So generally speaking, probably the experts here knows the different phases, the raw material extraction, manufacturing, processing, during transportation from factory to customers or between all phases, the usage and the retail, and the waste disposal, as far as we are in a circular economy, so we need to consider all these kind of phases. So based on the phases, obviously we are interested in or having data available on, so we can choose to leave or take out phases. The data we need differs per scope on depending on the application of the use, and the three main life cycle, as you know, cradle to gate, or cradle to grave, or cradle to cradle. So depends on the use, on the purpose, so we can consider this life cycle scopes. So for from our experience in MITMED project, as I mentioned it, we actually adjusted surveys and try to work with the national actors to collect data. In particular, we work with national agencies like Morocco, for example, the Moroccan Agency of Energy Efficiency, AME. The issue here, as I say, the codes are there, but there is no enforcement because they are not mandatory, so this is an issue. And we are facing the challenge of data. In fact, we can get the energy efficiency balance of the construction sector as a whole, but not the breakdown nor the data on the used material, which material, etc. So it's difficult to monitor really or implement energy efficiency measures in absence of such a data. Apart from the data may exist, but again, we should do an effort of harmonizing the data, standardizing the data, and again, convince everyone to share the data in a sort of information system or something like that. Probably in the past, I worked on similar project, so it's an effort to gather the right stakeholders, maybe oblige them somehow to sign MOUs in order to share the data. No? In Egypt, it seems that the new national energy efficiency strategy may include the obligation of following the national code soon, and this may help a lot in implementing later the LCA for building, hopefully, at least per pilot sector like governmental or industrial, etc. So probably Nordic European countries and the European Union in general are much advanced in this area. We need to get inspired from their best practices and what tools and softwares they use. Choosing our model defines our results and how to communicate them. It's crucial to transparently communicate our chosen life cycle model, business model to our stakeholders. In addition, the primary data is of crucial importance for the LCA. So as you know, we described already, so we have two type of life cycle inventory databases, like the EPDs presented here, or generic materials, or both. So the EPD database enables you to choose a specific material produced by a specific manufacturer and access all the LCA data on that material. The energy data gap is indeed limiting the implementation of LCA, and we need a sort of national information system, as I said, where we know who is providing which data and who is using what, and connect the different existing databases after harmonizing it, including the process of collecting the data itself need to be harmonized. Other challenges are related to financing. We need more involvement of the private sector and local banks, financial institutions in financing energy efficiency, but also an LCA project in the area of building. I think it should be something that we need to lobby, advocate for. The main conclusion is that extensive work is still urgently needed to improve the reliability of LCA tools in the building sector, but also the level of I was asked about data, so a lot of effort to be done in this area in order to provide reliable and trustworthy information for the policy making in this area. So without that, it's really a challenging issue. And hopefully with the new cities, the new constructions, like in Egypt, for example, with the new administrative capital, the Alamein city, a similar project in the region, probably they are starting, from scratch, and they are implementing some new facilities like district cooling, for example. And I guess for this kind of new constructions, we can get data and we can build on it to have a sort of LCA, or we can use LCA tools, etc. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jauad, and also showing us the complexity of generic data, specific data, data availability, the quality of data. And I think here also a nice bridge now to next speaker, which is Elin Eriksson, who is also going to talk about one of the drivers actually for data, and that sense, I would say, the lack of awareness and policy and regulations that was also mentioned as a strong driver for maybe future availability of data. Elin, do you want to stand up or you want to?
Yeah, thank you. So, yes, you can take the next slide. Yes, as Nasser said, you showed that there were future legal compliance as one of the external drivers. And in Europe, this is really one of the main drivers today. So on the slide, you see many of the legislations ongoing. So some of them are being developed, and some will be decided during the Swedish leadership in the EU during the spring, actually. So you know about the Green Deal, where the main goal is the carbon neutrality by 2050. And for the sustainable buildings, you have the levels describing how to steer in the construction sector. And the Eco-Design Directive is now being upgraded, and really an umbrella regulation for many products, also for non-energy using products. It's extended to most product groups, not all, but most. And that also includes a digital product passport. So that will be a quantification of the environmental impact of the product that also will be able to be communicated in a digital, easy way. So that will be a game changer, I think, for us that have been working with LCA during almost 30 years, I think. And the construction product regulation, CPR, is very important. And that also includes a declaration of performance and the CE mark. And the status there, I don't know if it will be finalized during the spring and decided.
Well, on the CPR, there's currently a proposal out there for voting that's now with the Commission, and there's a so-called CPR acquis. And the CPR acquis is now looking at the current regulation and how we can improve that so that it actually feeds back into the CPR proposal that is up for voting. Yeah. That's also in the sense of signaling the importance from the European Commission that they really want to speed this up, because that means there's a level of urgency and they want to deliver.
Yes, and as you know, the Commission will be exchanged in 2024, so there will probably be a lot of decisions during the spring. And the taxonomy is not only about green investments for the climate, it's also with the do no significant harm criteria, so it's quite complex. So that one also needs to be a little bit harmonized with the other parts of the legislation. but it's quite far-reaching to be in compliance with that. And the border adjustment mechanism also for the import and the product environmental footprint. I've been deeply involved in this. It's a methodology to quantify the footprint of environmental products. Yes, it's the methodology that's being used in these different legislations for the quantification. And also already we have on a national level requirements for declaration of common footprint, as in Sweden is one example, where when you construct a building, you need to report the climate declaration to the authorities. So it's coming more and more of this, and especially the Circular Economy Action Plan is very clear that you see the more and more circular materials, and it's a competition. I think the prices will go up because it's really the companies want to secure circular materials for their design of products. And one example is from the automotive sector, where the lifespan of a car is not only the designers, they see that the lifespan will not only double, it might be doubled by a factor 5 or 10. So the products will live longer. That's what the designers now work on. You can take the next slide. And all of the points. Thank you. So during these years, what did we do in Sweden and north of Europe and Europe to get where we are now? I think the most important is to have the competence, to build up the competence. So I think this is a challenge for the universities and the schools and authorities, that there will be available courses. Without that, it won't happen. I think you need to build up the competence, also in collaboration with other organizations and so on. And to take part in the standardization. I think that's very important, so the companies learn and are part of the requirement setting and the definitions and the whole pathway. And then to have policies and steering instruments that are in line with the EU policies. So we hope for that also in Egypt and other countries, that will happen as well. And if not, I guess the exporting industries need to apply and be in line with, comply with European legislation. So sooner or later will happen anyway. And digitalization to build up the local and regional data and databases. I think Sebastiaan will come back on that. And to carry out common collaboration projects where you learn from each other. So it might be companies and university and consultants and authorities together. So yes, so one thing I noticed, I don't see any solar panels here in Egypt, and maybe there is no carrots, no incentives to have them, at least here in Sharm el-Sheikh. So that's maybe when we come back in a few years, we will see solar panels all over. It's my dream. Yeah.
You were looking at Nasser and
Yes,
Ehab, so maybe you want to comment on the solar panels?
Yeah. Maybe they come back on that topic.
Great. So I think also making that switch now to the third challenge, and I think we hear this all on the floors, that the high costs connected to LCA or EPD. And I think here important to, I would make a statement that in order to lower the cost of EPD on actually LCA substantially and sustainably, we have to look at multiple factors. It's not just the license of an LCA software that you're making use of, because I think you can also split the different costs of EPD into the LCA development, and there you can split it into LCA cost for consultant, LCA expert, but also for the whole data collection, so the hidden cost for the manufacturer, getting the data on the table, for example. You have another cost, that's the verification cost. So how much do we want to pay for the third-party verified data? And you have the last one, that is actually to have your EPD published and annually reviewed in the sense of timeliness, accuracy, completeness, etc. Because of course an EPD, for example, is valid for 5 years, but technologies change, manufacturing processes change, so you will have to regularly review your LCA results. It's not just a one-off document that you publish and then it ends up in a shelf or in a database. So you really have to be active on that side. So when we look at these multiple factors that decide on the actual price in your local setting, in your company setting, we also say that it requires an orchestrated effort to actually create that kind of positive change. And what I mean with that is reducing the cost per published EPD by making efficient use of the LCA and the LCA background data. So when we look at that, I would like to pose here a couple of statements that we should consider in a collaborative approach, because it's not only the manufacturer, it's not the LCA consultant, it's the regulator, it's the data user, it's the software providers. So there's a whole ecosystem that is actually deciding on what is the cost of LCA or EPD. So when we think about that, and now trying to put this in the MENA region, we heard or we learned that actually there is very little competence and capacity on the ground. And if we think about the efforts that we need to, that we see on the global space, so life cycle initiatives, supporting not only the academia actually developing LCA, but also LCA is learning by doing. You have to look at the case. You have to know what you're modeling, because the modeling is not the rocket science. You have to understand the process and how do you put that in a model, and how actually can you have a flexible model that you can work with. So what I want to say with that is we, as EPD International, a global player, are investing considerable resources in building local capacity. So we do this with our partners, for example, EPD Egypt, where we say we have to educate and train strong national LCA experts clusters that are not, of course, siloed, but working also in a global space. So that actually an Egyptian manufacturer is not required to go abroad, because currently it's very little here. And I think you're reaching out to Italy or other places where we do have LCA competences and also made available. So in that sense, not going abroad, saving the currency exchange issues that we also hear a lot about, and also growing the offer in the market. So you're actually also pushing for competition. Because if there's only one player in the market, it could be a 2-star Michelin restaurant, everybody's going there from abroad. But if you have a couple of good restaurants that cram your street, that will create attraction, that will make you sure, okay, this is something where I can go and get what I need. We also think, and this is now speaking EPD International, incentivizing the use of life cycle thinking by possibly subsidizing LCA. We know, for example, in Turkey, export products are subsidized by supporting for the cost of LCA production. So actually the manufacturer can go to the authority and claim some of the money back. And maybe last not least also LCA software, because currently there are maybe three dominant LCA software providers. And I think a bit of more competition, because their business models are also changing, would not harm the market. Another driver that we heard, in the sense of, I would say, getting LCA out of the niche into the big market space, is also setting private but also public mandatory reduction targets. So you increase the need for LCA, so you also create a market. We also believe that EPD harmonization is very important for manufacturers, because the horror scenario for manufacturers is that they would have to publish EPDs in different regimes or in different authorities, asking for very specific informations. So here, harmonization, I would say, is key. One of the examples that we're following with the international EPD system and our licensees is also working actively in the eco platform. So I'm not saying one system, but I'm talking about one method and one PCR. Another topic is that the manufacturer has to understand, and I mentioned already was into this earlier, an EPD is not a document for one purpose use. The EPD has lots of LCA information that is third-party verified and can be made accessible and used in different kinds of applications. So think about regulatory requirements, but also commercial drivers. So if tomorrow Google comes and says, like, I want to have your carbon footprint in my Google shop, you should be able to react to that one. Where, for example, someone else actually is telling you, you have to tick the box in order to be in the market, because otherwise there's no market access. Another one, what I also think is going to be one of the key drivers is digitalization and digitization of data. Currently, EPDs are predominantly being provided in PDFs. And I think here there's a misunderstanding, because a lot of the manufacturers and LCA consultants have data available in a digital format. They translate this into PDF, give the PDF to the data user, who has to access that data manually, put it into some kind of a database before they actually can start working with it. So digitalization will drive this, not only the use of it, but also the production of it. And I have a slide on that one. And that slide is going to show you is actually that the market is moving from handling this manually to semi-automatic to fully automated. And if we really want to meet the objectives of the European Commission, having millions and millions and millions of products that have a carbon digit in the CE mark, we have to start thinking scale. We can't do LCA in the traditional way. And what I mean with that is making use of some of the tools. So this is one of the environments that we have here. So think about a company in Egypt that is basically not finding any kind of LCA consultant in the market, has to go abroad, hopefully can internalize some of the LCA competences, because we know that LCA is going to increase over the years, working with some kind of a software or tool. And I think the tool aspect is going to drive this one. So also the LCA software providers are finding means on how they can support the whole digitalization. Beside the company and the LCA consultant, you also need a program operator that is providing you the highway for digitized data. Thank you. So here what I'm saying is that you need to have a program operator that is prepared to work with digitized data, because that's an infrastructure issue. We, as EPD International, we provide that one. You can connect to an API on the front end via softwares, and then we also make that data available. And I think that's the other aspect, because we have LCA results, but we have different needs. So we have different data users for compliance, commercial use, and they really want to have access to the data, but they have maybe a requirement on a specific format. And that format is not the issue of the manufacturer. That's our job as the program operator to make them available to the multiple users. And that's, I would say, really the point where we are currently, moving from single LCA to so-called pre-verified EPD tools. You can read all about it on our website, moving towards fully integrated tools. And when we talk fully integrated, the wet dream of any kind of LCA consultant is live data from ERP systems, talking to a software model, providing EPD on demand. We're not there yet, but we have projects running on it. So I think that's my contribution, and I hope I'm in time. So now we have the next speaker, that's Ehab, Shalaby. And you're going to talk about the issue that we heard earlier already, strengthening the industry collaboration. And I asked you to give you a little bit of the helicopter view with a MENA perspective, because we have then Noriyuki also talking about an industry perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastiaan. Thank you so much, everybody. I know that the COP is ending, and it has been a very long and exhausting journey until we reached here today. In the beginning of this conference, I was so much honored that after the international society vested its trust in Egypt to host such an event we succeeded in a whole government, but a whole national approach towards building this, which I cannot see a conference. In fact, I can see a happening, because what is happening here is more than a conference. And I cannot be more happier today after we succeeded in doing this. Taking from Sebastiaan's last word, I would like to make 4 quick comments in order to bring insights about the global south and the global south problem in contexts. Sebastiaan was talking about data, and just to put in context, we have problem with financial data until today. Can you imagine? After 60 years of having frameworks such as the IFRS and the GAAP, big corporates are still having problems with reporting on financial data. Can you imagine when we ask them about environmental data? The challenge is really big, and it has to be seen in this context. Second, and coming back to your esteemed self, solar panels on the houses. Yes, this is true, but can you imagine that we have a law and a regulation for more than 10 years that is not being enforced until today? So yes, policies, laws, and regulations are important, but the enforceability of laws and regulations in the global south is also problematic. I cannot agree more with a very high-level notion that's been addressed by this panel, which is the importance of consultants and the importance in the built environment of architecture. Because in fact, after a very long time, while I was focusing on the cement sector, steel sector, iron sector, in the value chain, we discovered by the end of the game that we have a very big problem with consultants, because they prefer a business as usual approach rather than to go to green buildings. So I think this is the global south, if you want to put things into context. Moving to the topic, I'd like to address 3 major sections in my words. First of all, I want you all to see the problem with me. And the real problem is that this sector in particular, and I'm talking here about the full built environment as a scope. This is one of the most important socio-economic sectors in the developed world. It has one of the highest level of labor contribution. It has one of the highest level of GDP contribution, and it has one of the highest level of investment contribution. So in fact, this sector is very important from a socio-economic perspective. But in the same time, this sector is approximately contributing 20% of the GHG emissions. 15% out of them is related to energy consumption, and 5% is related to the IPPU. Accordingly, with this problem, if we couple this with that, with urbanization pressures, population growth rates, and GDP growth rate aspiration, we have a big problem. This sector will lead the development in the global south. And if we did not decouple the socio-economic dimension of this sector from the environmental impacts of this sector, we will be facing a very big problem. So simply, the sector is very important, and the solution lies in decoupling socio-economic dimensions from environmental dimension. Moving down, how can we do this? In fact, and before this conference, we were all talking only 2 dimensions, carrots and sticks. Among the major carrots that was provided for the sector is green finance, impact investments, business opportunities, carbon markets, and exporting. Many of my clients came to me asking for life cycle assessments. Why are steel industries, for example, cable industries, why do you want life cycle assessment? Because we are going to export to the European Union. So the incentive of each part of the value chain is completely different than the other parts. And this is where sectoral collaboration is important, because the why is very important in addressing the how when you deal with the sector. So this is about the carrots. What about the sticks? The sticks lies in regulations and the high level possibility of carbon taxes imposition. And both of those may put many risks on the sector. In fact, in this respect in particular, we have conducted a TCFD study on two sectors, steel and cement. And the outcomes of the two studies showed high-level stress testing on cash flows, income statements, and balance sheets. So we now monetized these risks into financial statements for the other sector to understand about them. So accordingly, if we want, in fact, and I'm talking about Egypt, before this conference, we were only talking risks and opportunities. Something very new happened in this conference. On the Egyptian level, there is another dimension that was added. It is fear. And why fear? Because all of my clients here in the conference, seeing all of the whole world moving this direction, they are now having the fear of being left behind. So, and fear is a very important motive that direct people. It may be have more powerful effect than risks and incentives, because risks and incentives are calculated, they are objective. But fear is unobjective. It's pushing people towards doing many things that they don't know why they are doing it. And this is something that was an outcome of this conference. Moving to what we did in order to address the problems and the solutions. When we started working in building coalitions between the full value chain, we found this coalition was built because we wanted to aggregate the challenges across the full value chain. And we came out with 6 major challenges that this sector is facing towards the transformation. The first challenge was a lack of a definition of green, a lack of an Egyptian taxonomy. And the good news here is that tomorrow there is an initiative that will be launched by the Egyptian government. It's called Sustainable Cities. And in this initiative, we are going to launch the first of its kind framework, Egyptian framework on what is to be defined as green when it comes to the built environment. So this is the first challenge. The second challenge is finance and investments. In fact, this sector is and I'd like to say here, to mention an experience of ours. One of Egypt's biggest banks promulgated $100 million green bonds. And after he promulgated the bond, he looked into his portfolio and he found that the biggest sector that can absorb this money is the real estate and construction sector. So, in fact, the amount of finance and investment that is available nowadays for this sector is not enough to address its needs. Third, technology. We have a very big problem with technology. And when I'm talking here, a very big problem with technology, put in mind that the construction industry is by itself a big elephant. It's not agile to acquire new technologies every day. And this is a very big problem that we were facing. Next is legal and regulatory frameworks. Sometimes legal and regulatory frameworks in our countries are hindering green transformation. Next, R&D and innovation, and I would like to praise this point in particular. In fact, R&D and innovation for piloting cannot be handled by anyone alone in the value chain. It needs a sectoral and a cross-sectoral collaborations in order to bear the costs of these piloting projects. Market readiness. Our markets are not ready, and the demand is not enough in order to push green transformation, in particular in the residential sector. Some signs have arose in the commercial sector due to the existence of multinational corporations and in the administrative sector. Okay. Next is data, and definitely data is a very big challenge that we are all facing. And the problem with data is that the part in the value chain that is facing the problem is not the part who has control over the data. It's another part in the value chain. So they will need to work in cross-sectoral approach. Knowledge and awareness. Falsely, whenever we talk about green built environments, everybody is thinking about 2 and triple pricing. We have just finished a session with EDGE, the IFC Green Building Framework, and the cost is now clear between 7 and 10% in only increase in the margin. It has been proved by pilot projects in Egypt. Right. What was the approach that we took in DCarbon Egypt in order to facilitate this? We did 3 things. First of all, we collaborated with the EBRD to subsidize LCA and EPD trainings in Egypt. And this is for awareness raising and capacity building. And the program, it seems that the program will expand much in the coming periods. Second, we initiated a project with the Commercial International Bank, which is the biggest bank in Egypt, that is called Sustaining Sectors Program. And this sector, and we started by the built environment sector, where the full value chain was there. We are trying now to green the full value chain together, and this is a private sector bank. Third, we initiated a study with the IFC where all of the value chain are on the table, and we discussed all the challenges and opportunities of collaboration. And finally, we launched during this conference, together with the UN Global Compact in Egypt, an initiative, Egyptian Sustainable Building Initiative, which is led by the biggest 6 developers in Egypt. And we are currently recruiting a champion for the initiative in order to gear the value chain. To put a final statement to my words, if we are going to talk about strengthening industry collaboration, I think it could be now strengthening intra and inter-industry collaborations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Ehab. And I'm actually very happy to hear that your own internal assessment identified some of the challenges that we're also discussing today. So I think in that sense, this might a confirmation from our side as well. The challenge is not changing. So we have now also Noriyuki talking on the strength of industry. But Noriyuki is going to give us a perspective, an industry perspective, also talking about that, but then from the materials industry.
Okay, thank you, Sebastiaan, and good evening, everyone. My name is Noriyuki Mita, the chair of Energy and Climate Change Leadership Group, ICCA, International Council of Chemical Associations. ICCA represents chemical manufacturers and producers around the world, accounts for more than 90% of global sale and more than 120 million jobs. And we are proud that the chemical industry and innovation in chemistry are part of the global climate change solution. And we believe that we can achieve more if we work together with consumers and our partners in value chain. In our statement last year, we fully supported the ambition to achieve climate neutral world by mid-century, and we were committed to be part of the solution by first reduce GHG emission associated with our own operations, and enable the entire value chain, including the building and the construction sector, and even individual consumers, to reduce their own GHG footprint through energy saving and emission reducing technologies and materials. And for us to realize this commitment, LCA, LTC is a critical key to make a science-based decision to reduce GHG emission, considering impact throughout the entire value chain. First of all, it enables us to reduce our own emission more effectively by finding choke points, as someone mentioned, and improving our processes and restructuring our supply chain. But at the same time, if we have better collaboration and communication with upstream and downstream industries and consumers, we can contribute more to them reducing their emissions through our products and technologies. So next slide, please. Now, as Elin told, policymakers are developing rules and regulations requiring us to provide product environment footprint for each product. Our customers began to require such print as a natural thing. So LCA is not the issue for advanced companies, but it's a requirement for all the companies now. So chemical industry has a long history on LCA. ICCA and our member associations have been very active in promoting LCA. We've been First, making studies to develop and improve calculation methods, showing their usefulness of these methods by applying them to concrete products as a good examples, and publishing results. Even some member associations are trying to improve national life cycle inventory for data accuracy. Also, fundraising awareness and understanding is critical, and providing various capacity building opportunities and tools. Having heard previous presentations, I found that challenges building and construction industries are facing are exactly similar to ours. Even within our industry, intra-industry, we have a wide spectrum of companies in our supply chain from upstream to downstream, like construction and building industry. So our efforts and experience on LCA within our supply chain, intra-industry, may draw your interest and can contribute to your industry. However, here, I would like to focus on collaboration among different industries, upstream and downstream. From the viewpoint of GHG emission for building and construction industry, chemical industry needs to provide materials with low carbon footprint as scope 3 upstream emitter, as you can see this model. And here, in order for building and construction industry to easily select and procure such products, our industry need to provide accurate science-based carbon footprint throughout our supply chain, from raw material providers, transport sector, to many manufacturers, so-called cradle-to-gate emission of chemical material. This means that upstream industry, we can sustainably continue to provide such value, the lower carbon footprint products, while downstream industry understands such value, choose such products, and share costs. Here, understanding life cycle thinking, sharing of common LCA methods, and accurate LCA information among all participants in value chain are keys. Also, collaboration between upstream and downstream industries enables reduction of scope 1, 2 emission of downstream industry. In this case, you are the scope 1, 2 emission emitter, and we are scope 3 upstream emitter. And lighter materials may have energy consumption. Materials may reduce energy consumption of construction in the installation process in construction stage. If both, and also some materials may require smaller energy and processes for maintenance and repair, shown in the in-use stage. So if both industries collaborate and share LCA methods, such contribution can be embodied in reduction efforts of downstream industry, such as design or procurement strategy of downstream industry, or LCA standards and tools you use. So chemical industry can provide materials for reduction of scope 3 downstream emission at end of life stage. Even we can do that, such as material made of recycled waste plastic, bio-based feedstock, or carbon-based captured CO2 feedstock. Also, operational carbon emission by user or tenant or buildings can be reduced. For example, certain chemical materials have better thermal insulation ability. I think you are familiar with energy efficiency standard of buildings, and such contribution of materials have become incorporated, I think. So I can say this is exactly based on life cycle thinking. And the important thing is that building and construction industry can sell such reduction of end-of-life stage emission and operational carbon, which you are not the emitter, to the consumers, in addition to reduction efforts of your scope 1, 2, and scope 3 upstream emission reduction. Here, providing accurate science-based LCA information is key for acceptance of consumer and downstream industry. So in conclusion, collaboration between industries is critical to realize reductions throughout the value chain, involving all stakeholders. Sharing life cycle thinking, LCA information, and common calculation methods are bases. Then upstream industry provides values, lower carbon footprint in the products and contribution to GH footprint of other stakeholders in the value chain with accurate science-based LCA information. Downstream industry selects such products and sell total reduction value for all stakeholders with awareness and understanding of LCA. By such interaction, creating level playing field and understanding for fair competition and cost sharing, we can achieve sustainable business process to reduce GH emissions throughout the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Noriyuki, for this very insightful perspective. Now I'm also willing to hand over to Ahmed Himy, giving us another, I would say, very interesting perspective on a similar topic, where you're going to talk about the socio-economic and political drivers that hold back the sustainable buildings market. After your presentation, we're going to open up the scene for the panel speakers to react and also ask questions from the audience. So the stage is yours, Ahmed.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to begin by thanking our hosts and the organizers of this event. So I'm Ahmed Himy from the Moroccan Agency for Energy Efficiency. I'm head of strategic studies and cooperation. So basically the agency is under the Ministry of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development, and our main mandate is to promote the philosophy of energy efficiency through capacity building, training, technical assistance, and coordinating with the relevant key stakeholders and ministries to adopt energy efficiency in their planning. So when we're talking about sustainability, there's always the three pillars: the environment, economic, and the social aspects that have to be respected. So I thought I would begin with the macroeconomic analysis of the building markets through the lens of Morocco. So Morocco has had quite a booming demand in housing, about 140,000 units per year. So I thought, what are the factors that go along with this demand in housing and construction? Obviously, the first one is demographics. So the age pyramid is very bottom heavy, and the number of households has been steadily increasing. A second indicator that I gleaned out is the rising income. Morocco has been steadily increasing its economic development, and at least in terms of relative income, perhaps not absolute, but that creates more, that translates in more disposable income for the households, and thus drives, drives a demand for housing. Another interesting point with the relationship of income is also the interest rates. With the banks having a 25-year period for loans, with the central bank giving a relatively low interest rate, it increased the capacity of debt for households and increased the demand for housing. And unlike most Anglo-Saxon countries where credit is based on the quality of the asset, in Morocco it's on 50% of the income of the household. Another indicator is public aid, and the government of Morocco has, because of the demographic aspect and because of the need to create housing for a huge, massive population, had defiscalized purchase for the low-income bracket, which accounts for about 2/3 of the demand of housing in Morocco. And finally, I mean, I talked about the economic boom of Morocco in the last 20 years, and it has shifted the type of construction to a more tertiarization. We've seen more commercial offices, and these offices have a much larger energy demand, I mean, an order of magnitude perhaps more than just residential. And to tie this all up, and what the industry indicator for what is the supply and demand and how it fits in terms of the market in Morocco, And I was quite surprised to find out that they use a very simple metric, and it's just the stock of housing over a 12-month period and how much has been sold. So that's the indicator for the progression of the market. And when we put this in the perspective of the pandemic, of the current crisis, of the rising energy, we see that steel, which is a big component of construction, has risen, at least in Morocco, by 50%. Cement, in all likelihood, is going to follow as well. PVC and wood, glass have all risen. And the question is, at the end of the day, are these promoters willing to sacrifice their margins or not? The answer is quite clear. I mean, they're going to more likely sacrifice quality and keep their investments intact. And this is, I believe, where we need EPDs, LCAs, and an entire regulatory framework. I mean, Ahmed has been working on putting together an energy performance certificate to try and orientate this problem of what is quality and helping people see the whole life cycle of the energy consumption. And given the national NDC, which is quite ambitious for Morocco, going back and looking at these indicators and seeing how they match with the LCA and the EPD and the life cycle assessment. I mean, for the demographic aspect, it will help the government glean out what is more profitable in the long term. We've been seeing a lot of urban sprawl in Morocco, and perhaps having an EPD, this carbon offset, will allow us to maybe think that perhaps to reduce the stress of the city's equipment, try to build up instead of build out. In terms of rising income and interest rates, I think this was mentioned earlier with the nomenclature. If we're able to put together a clear taxonomy on what is a green building, we'll be able to attract a lot more foreign direct investments. And also in terms of the interest rates that the banks are offering, we'll be able to target the different products to specific income brackets. This will also help the public aid to fit with its long strategy. And finally, as I've been talking about the tertiarization, where we have these new buildings that are very energy intensive, they have an energy impact, and a big budget for a lot of the companies is the housing and the real estate. And for them to also understand over the lifespan of their investment, reducing the risk through purchasing a quality in the sense of carbon, in the sense of energy, will reduce the risk and even spur additional investments. So yeah, that's wraps up my analysis, and I think that for Morocco, it is perhaps time to use a leapfrog of what we, instead of going just straight into energy performance certificates, maybe perhaps go straight into embodied carbon certificates, just as it happened with telecoms, and avoid a lot of the quagmire of setting up one methodology only to have to follow suit a few years later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, panel, for, I would say, very insightful comments, reflections, and inputs on some of the major key challenges that we are facing, obviously, in MENA region, in Egypt, but also in other parts of the world. So in that sense, I'm now opening up for the panel to react on the other speakers, maybe with some other reflections, contributions, complementary comments, and questions, of course, also from the audience. Because I think we have time. It's, we have 30 minutes for a Q&A if you want. But I would like to start maybe with the panel first, if there are any reactions to your... yes, Jonathan?
Maybe one thing about data. I've been working now with many countries on trying to understand, you know, how the built environment exactly is. And you go to many countries that actually don't even know what their building stock is. They don't even have that data. Sometimes they have data, like Cambodia only has data for the last 10 years in terms of the building permits that they gave out, but they don't even know if all these buildings have been constructed. So data, I think, is a really important challenge in many countries. And I mean, when we talk about Europe or, you know, the more developed countries, we're lucky because there is some data, even if it's still difficult to bring it all together. One of the things that we're trying to push is the building passport, because if we could adopt for all buildings some kind of electronic repository where from the beginning of the construction you start collecting the information and then you can have all that information available later. And part of that information, of course, the issue is about the ownership of the data. The ownership of the data should be of the owner of the building, but part of the data maybe should be mandatory to provide to governments and decision makers to help them making the right strategies. So I know in Europe we're talking about the renovation passport for buildings. I think a building passport overall is something, a comprehensive building passport that looks at the materials and all the different aspects that you have would be an ideal way to overcome a bit the data challenge. Of course, it's going to take time before we get there, but we're working with Morocco at the moment on that, and we're trying to work with other countries to especially see now how we can integrate in the models that we are developing the issues about materials, where in many countries they don't even know about the number of materials that are being used. And then I think another major issue is that there's a lot of informal housing, a lot of self-construction, and there it becomes even more difficult. So there are many challenges still ahead, but yeah, data I think is really critical for decision makers to know what to do. If I go to a decision maker and I tell him what I just told you about the importance at the global level and the emissions, he's going to tell me, yeah, what does it mean for my country? And if I want to tell him what it means for his country, I need to be able to find the data to show it. And I think there's been not enough emphasis. I mean, for many years, environmental data, everybody has been telling, like, this is the data that you should collect. These are the indicators that you should put forward. But no one has ever come forward to actually support the countries to actually collect that data. And that's why today, in many cases, you develop projects, and those projects are not seen as strong enough because you cannot really show, like, what will be really the impacts because you don't have a good baseline. So I would kind of more plea also for, I don't know, the donors and all that to support more the data collection and the research part so that, we have actually more evidence to actually prove that what we are saying can actually really make a difference. So I think that's, data is really an important element.
I see some other people willing to react, but one comment I have for myself also here is that I think the construction sector itself is the problem, because if you talk about LCA consultants, they say there's no business, there's no money in there to get those data on the table. Other markets, other industries, there's something to earn. Construction sector has that challenge embedded in this sector itself. That's what you hear a lot from the LCA consultants. But I saw Nasser, please.
Yeah, actually, because we discussed challenges, so should we stop doing LCAs? This is the question we need to answer. So my comment is that no, we should do LCA because actually it is the best method existing so far on assessing the product and assessing the life cycle of the building. So this is, my conclusion. But we should keep working on data. We should keep working. Actually, Mr. Mita, he was talking about collaboration. Actually, during my PhD in Japan, I was doing an LCA for the life cycle of electricity production from biomass. And we were looking for data of transportation and distance between locations. So it was there, but we didn't know where it is. So if everybody show what data he has, we can solve several issues relating to data availability. So this is one thing. The second thing we face here as local LCA consultant is that we always focus on the background data. We don't have regional data even. So basically, we use global life cycle assessment data. This is in the upstream before the company or before the factory, and then in the downstream. So what we in EPD Egypt are now thinking is developing a technology excellence center or data excellence center so that we can develop a local database, learning from Europe, learning from the best practices so far, and then build upon. Actually, again, when I was starting my PhD, the EcoInvent database had only 2,000 data sets. But now they have more than 170,000 data sets. So if they stopped and said that we have challenges in data, we wouldn't be there now. So EcoInvent is the biggest data database in our era. So yeah, this is also focus, do LCA, focus on improving the data and build local data centers, and we will do it. We will be there. Thank you so much.
Noriyuki?
For the data, I think there are three types of issues. First is data of the certain products or technologies. In this case, companies possess the data itself. So issue is how to share that information. Maybe the commercial driver can solve it. The second is some kind of aggregated national data. For example, the energy efficiency or energy intensity or the other type of energy related statistics. So it's in even some developing countries, they don't have the statistics. So we need to work for the developing such ability to have this national statistics. And third is the ability of the small and medium enterprises. Here, I think that we can, even we are doing some kind of efforts to providing the very simplified tools or education. So in this case, the capacity building works. That's in my comment.
There's a comment from the...
Good evening, Andrew Minson from the Global Cement and Concrete Association. Firstly, thank you so much for all of you, and thank you for all of us for attending. And why didn't these people come? So I'm really sorry that you haven't got more people to speak with, and so thank you very much for putting together the panel. So I'm a structural engineer, so I love buildings and I'm involved in buildings, but I'm employed by a material industry, and I'm responsible for the EPD tool that we provide for our members to enable them to produce EPDs. And obviously, cement and concrete, we're trying to decarbonize it, making progress on that, but currently for your buildings, it is a significant component. And so I'm really here to encourage you to say we're doing our part to try and help our members do it cost effectively, and you're playing your part in automating it, and we're trying to, our next version will be have a digital output to be part of that journey to try and reduce the costs for our members to produce it, to enable them to be used by the designers, and you're quite right, the designers need to play their role. I've got a few questions, but they're real detailed, and I'll pick them up individually afterwards, but I just did want to thank you for the panel.
Thank you. Any other, someone wants to share some from the panel? Well, I guess then it's time for your specific questions. Do you want to do them bilaterally, or you want to post them here? Good.
Okay. I wanted to save the time, but then I would like to draw the attention of all of the audience, is that number one, Colombia has one of the best practices across the world when it comes to increasing the number of green buildings, 10 million square meters in 5 years. I think we need to review the Colombian experience. Second, carbon markets, which is under negotiation in the room behind us now, is very important because it will incentivize this market. Third, to close with from my side, after devaluation, LCA and EPD became very expensive in Egypt. Thank you so much.
We're trying to do our share, Ehab. Yes, Jonathan.
Maybe just the one thing that I think is the most important is just to have a life cycle thinking. If everybody starts adopting a life cycle thinking, it's not only about maybe conducting all the assessments and everything, which of course is better, but already if we have the thinking, then we might actually start looking at the, from the start to the end, how we are doing things, and we will do them better.
Thank you. Are we out of time? Are we? Wait. I thought we had half an hour to play still. Okay. So I guess that's that's it. Thank you very much for everybody attending. And I'm going to wish you a fantastic continuation of the COP27. It was a comment from you, but I'm also very thankful for that you attended, because we know there's a lot of after work, apéro activities going on. So really appreciate your presence here tonight. And hopefully you can still pick some of the remainders of the continuation. So thank you very much. That's it.
Yeah.
Please sit down and take a picture. Or stand up. I think stand أحسن. Seated but smiling this time. The conversation was very serious.